Polish Air Force War Memorial at South Ruislip was unveiled in 1948 to honour and commemorate the Polish airmen killed during the Second World War whilst under British command. This prominent memorial, often wrongly referred to as the Polish War Memorial, is close to the southeastern perimeter of RAF Northolt. Between 1941 and 1944, this station was the home of 7 Polish fighter squadrons on rotation, making up a Polish fighter wing. So it is particularly fitting that RAF Northolt now hosts the only permanent exhibition in Britain dedicated to the Polish Air Force during the Second World War.
Northolt to mój dom, to drugi dom. Jak myśmy tu przyszli do Northoltu od 1941 roku, 3 dywizjony były tutaj stale aż do inwazji. I myśmy tu się czuli jak w domu.
For me as a pilot in the Royal Air Force, I was brought up on all the stories of the Battle of Britain. It's iconic in our history. And as an aviator, a man who flies aircraft, it's hugely important. Certainly the artifacts in the Polish lounge, each has a special memory really. I think certainly flying logbooks which articulate and lay out the dogfights that the pilots undertook back in the 40s is poignant. You know, leather flying helmets and goggles, they're iconic and add to the atmosphere of being in a Hurricane or a Spitfire back in 1940. Cramped, and the smell of aviation gas and the smell of sweat, the smell of fear, and getting airborne and taking the fight to the enemy. That's what the artifacts in this place evoke really for me.
The lounge was opened on the 14th of February 2007 by the last Polish president in exile, Ryszard Kaczorowski. The exhibition tells the story of Polish airmen and highlights their achievements during the Second World War in Poland, in France, and in England, which for them was Wyspa Ostatniej Nadziei, the island of the last hope. In 1918, at the end of the First World War, Poland recovered her independence after 123 years of occupation by the Russians, the Prussians, and the Austrians. It was once more a free country, but devastated after the First World War, with virtually no resources. Nonetheless, one of the first things they managed to do was to create an extraordinarily successful and effective aircraft industry. In 1932, at the Paris Air Show, the Polish aviation produced the Pesatel P-7, which was the world's first all-metal monoplane fighter. Nobody else had anything like it at the time. The only problem was that by 1939, the Pesatel P-11 as a fighter was outclassed by the latest German designs, and on the bomber front, while there were about 80 in total, only half the Polish total of bombers was of the more modern sort. And so they faced the might of the Luftwaffe when they invaded on the 1st of September 1939, outnumbered 10-1. Nonetheless, they put up a remarkably good performance, shooting down 126 enemy aircraft in the 5 weeks or so before the fighting in Poland finally ceased. As the Polish Air Force gradually withdrew towards the southeast of Poland, on the 17th of September, the Russians invaded from the other side. Faced with those two enemies, there was no possibility of maintaining any prolonged resistance, and the Air Force was evacuated into Romania with the intention of getting to France to continue the fight from there. Once in Romania, the position was very difficult. Romania was officially neutral, but pro-Axis. There was a risk of internment for any Polish airman who found himself there. So very swiftly, they all had to become civilians, acquire false papers from the Polish embassy in Bucharest, make their way to the Black Sea, and try and escape from there. A difficult voyage, but the hardest part was the periods of calm, when suddenly you had hundreds of Polish airmen who now had nothing to do and nothing to think about apart from what might have happened to their families, their friends, their country, and what future, if any, awaited them in France. And so we come to France. For the Polish airmen, this must be the answer. France had 1 million men under arms. It had the largest amount of armour of any European country. It had the advantages of the British Expeditionary Force. It had the Royal Air Force here as well. Surely this will be the way to finally stop the German incursions. The Polish Air Force was quartered largely at Lyon-Bron, having arrived first at Marseille. But the problem they found there was, firstly, the French didn't believe they could fly, and secondly, they found, regrettably, an extraordinary lack of fighting spirit among some parts of the French Air Force. Krasnodębski, who commanded 303 Squadron here at Northolt, recalls how, on one occasion, the base he was at, they were having lunch in the mess. A messenger arrived to say that enemy aircraft were approaching. Every Polish pilot leapt to his feet and ran to the aircraft. The French commander stayed sitting down and simply said, "Well, what's the hurry? We haven't finished our lunch." On that occasion, the Poles found themselves flying against the Germans with only one Frenchman with them. Or Paszkiewicz, who again flew a 303 Squadron here at Northolt, recalls how he was flying alone with a group of French pilots when they were ordered to strafe an enemy armoured column. The French pilots decided that it was too dangerous to make such a low-level attack and refused their orders, so Paszkiewicz strafed the column on his own. Getting out of France was again another set of problems, because immediately the armistice was declared, an armed guard was put on every aircraft to stop the Polish airmen flying them to Britain. Attempting to get to the south of France to escape that way was met with frustration by French train commanders who refused to move the trains until a pistol was put to their heads. And finally, a large amount of the Polish Air Force arrived at the little port of Saint-Jean-de-Luz near Biarritz, where the port commander informed them that although the British liner, the Arundel Star, was lying just offshore waiting to take them to Britain, under the terms of the armistice, he couldn't possibly allow them to go. The Polish commander simply said to him that the several thousand Polish airmen with him were quite well behaved at the moment, but if they didn't get on that ship fairly quickly, he couldn't guarantee that this would continue. French port commander thought about the situation and then said, "I am formally going to not allow any Pole to pass through my port, and I'm going to put those orders into action in exactly 3 hours' time." By when, of course, the Arundel Star, well laden with Polish airmen, was heading towards the horizon. For the Poles on the Arundel Star, their first sight of England was something rather special. For them, this wasn't England they were coming to, it was Wyspa Ostatniej Nadziei, the island of the last hope. Poland had fought, and Poland had fallen. France, with all its men, all its material, with all its allied support, France had fallen too. Everybody knew that if Britain fell, that would be the end of freedom in Europe for as long as anyone could conceivably imagine. This was indeed the island of the last hope that they were coming to. And so we come to Britain. The Poles thought this would be the real answer because now they could get their hands on first-rate equipment, Hurricanes and Spitfires, and with all their experience in combat, they were exactly what Britain needed at a crucial point in the Battle of Britain. Unfortunately, none of them spoke English, and the entire British defence system depended on controlling aircraft in the air by radio from the ground. So for the first few weeks, the pilots who came here to Northolt, who formed 303 Squadron, found themselves riding tricycles on the parade ground at RAF Uxbridge nearby, equipped with radios and compasses, and until they could respond appropriately to English orders, no one wanted to let them loose in the air. They were having a training flight, and the 303 Squadron, although composed mainly of Polish pilots, it had an English commander, Squadron Leader Kellett, and English and Canadian flight commanders. They were on a training mission. Paszkiewicz saw an enemy aircraft, asked for permission to go and make an attack. He was told no, this is a training flight, stay with the formation, but he broke away anyway, disobeying orders, closed in on what turned out to be a Messerschmitt 110, shot it down, and as he describes it, with extraordinary ease. He had never had such power and speed and weaponry in his hands before. Returned to base. When he arrived at Northolt, Squadron Leader Kellett gave him a public reprimand for disobeying orders, followed by a public congratulation for shooting down an enemy aircraft, and the next day the squadron was declared operational. From that combat, you can see in the picture behind me a representation of Paszkiewicz shooting down the Me-110, and in the case on my right you will find part of the engine of the Me-110 that he shot down. Sadly, next to it you'll also see a small pile of shrapnel, which is all that remains of Paszkiewicz's Hurricane when he in turn was shot down about a month later. By that time he was already an ace with 6 victories to his credit, and along with many other Polish airmen, he is buried a few miles from here at Northwood Cemetery in the War Graves plot, where the graves of Polish airmen are tended to this day with dedication and care by their compatriots who followed down the generations. Paszkiewicz's victory was the first of 126 that were credited to 303 Squadron during the Battle of Britain. That made them the highest scoring squadron of any that took part in the battle. Extraordinarily, of the 16-week period of the battle, they were only operational for about half of it, and they achieved their extraordinary results at a 70% lower casualty rate than other squadrons flying. On September the 15th, which we now celebrate as Battle of Britain Day, there are few people who know that 1 in 5 of the pilots in the air on that day was Polish. But this was an entire Polish Air Force, complete with ground crew, intelligence, admin, and all the other necessary staff. And the ground crew were every bit as important. At the end of the day, on the 15th of September, there were 9 or 10 Hurricanes of 303 Squadron that made it back to land again at this airfield, RAF Northolt. They were so damaged by combat that all of them were classed as Category 2 battle damage, which meant they'd have to be returned to the factory for repairs. That evening, as the sun went down, the squadron had ceased to exist as a fighting force until new aircraft arrived. That is, until everyone left the aircraft and the engineering officer, Flying Officer Wjorkiewicz, came out, looked at the Hurricanes, got his boys out, wheeled them into the hangars, worked all night with who knows what, but found one way or another of making every one of those aircraft serviceable again, and at dawn on September the 16th, all the Hurricanes were lined up again, ready for service, airworthy, and 303 Squadron continued its remarkable career without missing a beat. It's important not to overlook the role of the 4 Polish bomber squadrons. They were in fact operating from as early as 1940, when 300 and 301 squadrons were busily attacking invasion barges being lined up in France, while their colleagues in the fighter squadrons were trying to defeat the enemy in the air. They took part in the first 1,000 bomber raid, they took part in all major operations of the war, and played an extremely important role in the attempts to support the Warsaw Rising in 1944. The main problem of which was that the Red Army sat on one side of the Wisła outside Warsaw doing nothing, while the Polish Home Army attempted to defeat the Germans single-handed. We had hoped that there would be at least facilities to land and refuel provided by Stalin, but, great ally that he was, he refused them. So the only way that airdrops could be made to Warsaw was by flying units from Brindisi on exceptionally long missions, which then involved low-level attempts to drop supplies over Warsaw, with inevitably huge losses of personnel and aircraft. Their story is easily overlooked, but I'm happy to say that at RAF Ingham in Lincolnshire, the original airfield from which 300 Squadron operated is now being restored as a memorial to the Polish bomber effort, and will become in its own right the Polish Bomber Museum. In the case beside me here is the original uniform of Gabsiewicz, who commanded the Polish wing at RAF Northolt. Also his 316 Squadron flying scarf, along with a German pistol which he managed to liberate at some later stage in the war. When Gabsiewicz was commanding the Polish wing here, the station became effectively a Polish station, to such a point that the bar in the officers' mess generally sounded like Warsaw on a busy Saturday night, and it became the only RAF station which ever needed to have a sign hanging in the bar saying English spoken, for the benefit of thirsty and worried English officers visiting the station for the first time. In early 1944, the Polish wing moved down to Chailly, one of the advanced landing grounds on the south coast, ready to support the invasion of France. When the wing left, they presented the officers' mess the large silver cup, which has engraved on it the numbers of all the fighter squadrons which had served here as their gift to the mess. It's still brought out on dining-in nights in the mess, because it was a sign of affection between the Polish Air Force and the station, which many pilots, including my father, always regarded to the end of his life as his second home. In 1940, in France, two Polish Air Force officers realized the need for there to be a single unifying standard to represent the whole of the Polish Air Force and to link it, in exile, with the home country. They made their designs, sent them to Wilno, and over the next year or so, the standard was created in private houses, in convents, in tiny pieces, in secret, under occupation. By the time it was complete, France had long since fallen, and the standard was then smuggled out in the Japanese diplomatic bag to Stockholm. From Stockholm it was flown to London, and from London taken to RAF Swinderby, where General Sikorski presented it to 300 Bomber Squadron. At the end of the communist period in Poland, the standard, which had been here since the war, was finally returned to